Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Zechariah chapters 5 and 6, where we see false and true temples. Zechariah chapters 1 through 6 contain 8 visions. We've been working our way through these. We come to chapter 5, and we're introduced to the vision of a flying scroll. Notice that's going to refer to judgment. And then right after that, when we get to verse 5, we're going to see a woman and a basket, and that's going to represent Shinar, that is Babylon. Notice how that relates, that balances out. Back in chapter 1, verse 18, we saw a vision of judgment. It was the symbols of horns and smiths, and a measuring line that symbolized the idea of fleeing Babylon. So judgment, Babylon, judgment, Babylon. Now we're ready to see the same pattern here in chapter 5. Chapter 5 and verse 1, then I lifted up my eyes again and looked, and behold, there was a flying scroll. Now that's unusual because scrolls do not usually fly. They are to be read. Chapter 5 and verse 2, and he said to me, what do you see? And I answered, I see a flying scroll. Now we're told a bit more about it, and its length is 20 cubits. A cubit is the distance from your fingertip to your elbow, roughly around 18 inches. So this is about 30 feet, and its width 10 cubits. So this is a very large flying scroll. Verse 3, then he said to me, this is the curse. This is what the scroll represents. It is the curse that is going forth over the face of the whole land. Surely everyone who steals will be purged away according to the writing on one side, that is, on one side of the scroll, and everyone who swears will be purged away according to the writing on the other side. So you have the sense that there is writing on both sides of the scroll. Reminds me a little bit of the law. Remember when Moses came down from Sinai with the law? It was written on tablets, not on a scroll, but on front and back. And we've seen that same imagery used in others of the prophets, where there would be a scroll with writing on the front and the back representing judgment. And the judgment had filled up every available space. Now, notice the judgment here is for two things. On the one hand, everyone who steals. On the other hand, everyone who swears, and it's the idea of swearing falsely. And in both cases, a curse is placed on such a one. Verse 4, I will make it go forth, declares the Lord of hosts, and it will enter the house of the thief, that's the one who steals, and the house of the one who swears falsely by my name. You know, it's bad enough to swear falsely, but to swear falsely by the name of God, to evoke God's name, is a really bad thing. And it will spend the night within that house, and notice the curse part, and consume it with its timber and stones. And so the judgment comes upon real people in real situations who are doing real sins. So that's the flying scroll. Next, we get to verse 5, and we see the second image, and it is a woman. Actually, it's going to be several women, and a basket representing Shinar. Chapter 5 and verse 5, then the angel who was speaking with me went out and said to me, lift up now your eyes and see what this is going forth. Verse 6, and I said, what is it? And he said, this is the ephah. Now, an ephah is a measurement. We would say maybe like a gallon, but a gallon is a liquid measurement. An ephah is a measurement for solid things. We might say a barrel. It depends on how big your barrel is. And again, he said, this is their appearance in all the land. And behold, a lead cover was lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the ephah. So it's an ephah, however big it is, it's big enough to hold a woman. So that's a pretty good size measurement. Verse 8, then he said, this, and now we find out who the woman is. This is wickedness. It's a woman, and her name is wickedness. She represents that. And he threw her down into the middle of the ephah and cast the lead weight on its opening. That is, let's shut her in. We don't want wickedness getting out and spilling over and making a mess of things. Verse 9, then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and there were two women. So suddenly there's been a multiplication. Instead of one, now there's two. But they're coming out with the wind in their wings. Notice they are winged women, and they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heavens. So women, not only a woman inside, but women lifting it up and carrying it to wherever it is going to go. Verse 10, and I said to the angel who was speaking with me, where are they taking the ephah? Verse 11, then he said to me, to build a temple for her. And you say, well, that's good. No, it's a temple that's going to be in the land of Shinar. Shinar is another term for Mesopotamia. That's the place where Babylon is. So it's a pagan temple, not a godly temple. And when it is prepared, she will be set there on her own pedestal. So wickedness is going to be placed on a pedestal in the temple in Shinar, in Mesopotamia, in Babylon. Now we move from the judgment that is placed there, the judgment coming to and from Babylon. Babylon had been the place where they'd been taken to be judged, but now Babylon itself is judged, to now a final of these 8 visions is the vision of 4 chariots, beginning in chapter 6 and verse 1. Chapter 6 and verse 1, now I lifted up my eyes again and looked, and behold, 4 chariots were coming forth from between the 2 mountains, and the mountains were bronze mountains. This is serious. This is weighty. Verse 2, with the first chariot were red horses, with the second chariot black horses, with the third chariot white horses, and with the fourth chariot strong dappled horses. I have 4 horses with each of these 4 chariots. Now, back in chapter 1, we saw 4 horsemen, and the horses were different color. There was red and sorrel and white. Now, here in chapter 6, we have 4 chariots pulled by horses that are red, white, black, dappled. When we get to Revelation chapter 6, we will see a vision of 4 horsemen where the colors, again, will be white, red, black, and that last one has been translated either ashen or green or some sort of sickly color. You know, when somebody sort of goes green, that means they're not feeling so well. So that's the idea behind that. Back in chapter 1, they were sent out by God to patrol the earth. And remember, they came back and all the earth was peaceful and quiet. We're not going to see that report again. Here in chapter 6, it is 4 spirits of heaven going out to patrol the earth, and they're actually going in different directions. But when we get to Revelation chapter 6, it's anything but peaceful. These are called by the 4 living creatures around the throne, and they go out, and all sorts of bad things begin to happen. Conquests and sickness and financial insecurity and death and all sorts of bad things that take place in Revelation chapter 6, because by the time we get to Revelation chapter 6, for a century after the church had been born, there's all sorts of persecutions and nations rising and falling and bad things taking place. But that hadn't happened yet in Zechariah's day. And so we see in verse 4, then I spoke and said to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these, my Lord? Now, the angel could have just said the same things that you saw back in chapter 1. But instead, the angel replied to me, these are the 4 spirits of heaven going forth after standing before the Lord of all the earth. Notice they had come before the Lord, and then he sends them out again. Verse 6, with one of which the black horses are going forth to the north country, and the white ones go forth after them, while the dappled ones go forth to the south country. So not all the horses in this case are going in the same direction, because the same thing isn't going to happen everywhere. Notice there are some going to the north country. If you're in Judah and you go north, you say, well, Mesopotamia looks sort of northeast. But remember, people don't go across the intervening desert. So they're coming down from the north, from Mesopotamia. In the south country, that's the land of Egypt. And things are not going to be the same in the north country and the south country. In the north country, that's going to be eventually taken over by Persia, and that's all well and good. In the south country, some very different things are going to happen. There's going to be conquests and wars and all sorts of things. Eventually, Persia will come over and take over for a time, but there's going to be some unrest that takes place. So they're not identical. Verse 9, the word of the Lord also came to me, saying, take an offering from the exiles, from Heldai to Abijah, from Jediah, and you go the same day and enter the house of Josiah the son of Zephaniah. where they have arrived from Babylon. So there's been some visitors that have come from Babylon and some VIPs representing remember, most of the Jews had not come back from Babylon. Most of them are still there in Mesopotamia. Verse 11, and take silver and gold, make an ornate crown, and set it. You're to take this crown and set it on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Now we saw Joshua the high priest back in chapter 3. Remember the issue where he had dirty clothes, filthy clothes that were removed from him, and he represented the people of God, just like Zerubbabel represented the people of God in chapter 4. But now we're seeing an ornate crown, and it's set upon his head as high priest. Verse 12, then say to him, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, a man whose name is Branch, for he will branch out from where he is, and he will build the temple of God. And so notice there is going to be a branching out, and the temple of God is going to be built. And you say, well, I thought that Zerubbabel was building the temple of God. No, this is a bigger and better temple. They're building one right now. But the ultimate temple, the better temple, is the temple that is built by the branch. And when we say the branch, remember, the branch has already been introduced both here and earlier in the prophets. The picture is of a great tree that represented Israel that had been chopped down. And from that stump would come forth a branch, a twig, a sprout that would grow up into a greater tree that will build the temple, the ultimate temple of the Lord. Now, what is this temple of the Lord? What is this crown? What is this all about? Verse 13, yes, it is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he who will bear the honor and sit and rule on his throne. Notice he's not just the priest, but he sits on the throne. Thus he will be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace will be between the two offices. What two offices? The offices of, well, you want to say king, but Zerubbabel's not actually a king, but he's descended from the kings. The office of king and the office of priest are going to be united. Now, we saw this crown that is placed upon the high priest. And the high priest did wear sort of a crown. In Exodus chapter 29 and verse 6, we see the high priestly crown. It was called the Nazar, but that's not the word that's being used here. Here, this crown is an atera. It's the kind of crown that a king wears, not a priest. And initially, there's a sense in which this was initially fulfilled in the Hasmonean rulers, what we call the Maccabees, because they were a priestly family, and they eventually took for themselves both the high priesthood, but also the kingship. So they took these two and combined them into one, so that the Hasmoneans eventually, not immediately, but eventually were both priests and kings. But this is fulfilled in a greater sense. This is ultimately fulfilled in the person of Jesus, who is both a priest and a king. He is the one who comes and builds the temple. You see, it's fulfilled in Jesus. He will branch out. He is the one who, from that broken stump of Jesse, who sprouted forth and branched forth, he is the one who will build the temple. Indeed, he stood in the temple and he said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again. He was speaking not of the temple of brick and stone, but the temple of his own body. He will rule, and he will be both priest and king. Those who are far off, this is the next verse we're going to read right now, will come and build the temple. You say, wait a second, I thought he was the temple, that he raised it up. Yes, that's true, but he will also not just raise the temple, he will build the temple. Here it is in verse 15, and those who are far off will come and build the temple of the Lord. Now that took place in Zechariah's day, where, yes, those who were far off sent the supplies, and even Darius, the emperor of the Persian Empire, got into the action by giving the funds. Of course, it was from Jewish taxes at work. But that's not the temple that we're speaking of. We're talking about the temple that Jesus built, that is built with people from far off. You see, that's the temple that is built with you and with me. We are the building blocks of the temple that he is still building, and we who were far off have been made near through the blood of Christ so that we might become building blocks in his new and greater temple, the temple that will fill the entire world.